He is a scientist at the Center for Agriculture and Biosciences International, which goes by the acronym CABI, in Delémont, Switzerland. It is an internationally acclaimed research center and known to most entomologists around the world. On an interesting note, the Swiss Army knife was first made by a company called Wenger, located in Delémont, but it was later bought by another company. Lukas graduated with a BSc from Freiburg, MS from Laval, and a PhD from Toronto. He worked as a postdoctoral fellow and teaching assistant at the University of Toronto before moving to Delémont. He specializes in research on biological control of insect pests, especially on invasive species. He has an interesting story to tell us. Lukas, you're on.
Thank you very much, Arthur. I'm going to share my screen now. I hope you can all see the presentation.
Yeah.
Yeah. And at work time, so relieved.
Yeah, Zoom is usually quite good. Okay, so I'm going to give you a short presentation today about searching Asian hornet nests using radio telemetry. And first of all, I'm going to say just a couple of words about the organization I'm working for. It's a non-for-profit organization. And we have more than 450 staff across 26 locations worldwide. The yellow dots you can see where we have research centers. We are not in Canada, but we have a small office in the US, for example. And I'm located in Switzerland, as Arthur already said. Our headquarters is in the UK. We're financed through several entities, but one of the main funding comes from our member countries, one of which is Canada, as you can see in the upper middle part. And so those countries basically subscribe to help, especially in agriculture and the environment. So we help them with several things. Especially, we do quite a lot of work in African countries, and most of it is helping with insects or other pests that attack crop, and helping those countries getting a higher yield from what they plant. However, I am working on invasive species here, mainly in Europe, but also other countries. And for example, I'm working on Drosophila susukii. So this is a little fruit fly. But one of my projects is on the yellow-legged Asian hornet, Vespa velutina nigrithorax, which you can see here on the picture. It is invasive in Europe, coming from Asia, from East Asia, and also invaded Japan and Korea. And it is a bee hunter, as you can see on the right picture, where it is on a beehive. What I'm not really going to talk about is this species here, which is a different one. It's the Asian giant hornet, Vespa mandarinia, or also called by some murder hornet. Murder hornet is a term that is used basically because it is hunting bees and kills them, but other insects as well. But as you can see, those species are quite different. On the left-hand side, you see the Asian giant hornet, which is recently invaded Canada and the US. And on the right-hand side is the yellow-legged Asian hornet. So it's a much smaller species. However, nevertheless, a very efficient bee hunter, as you will see further on. What is interesting about this subspecies, in fact, is that it is in Asia, where it has different color forms. So all of them are are scientifically called Vespa velutina and have like a different third name, which describes, in most cases, their color form. And as you can see here, the upper one is the subspecies Nigrithorax, which was introduced accidentally to France in 2004. And from there, quite rapidly expanded, as you can see in the GIF here. It now reached Spain, Portugal, Germany, Italy, Belgium, the Netherlands, and very recently also Switzerland. What we do here in our laboratory is also the risk assessment. So we do things like about potential distribution of species, and we can do this thanks to what is called bioclimatic modeling. So we can analyze which climate the hornet is living in originally, like the green dots in Asia here, in East Asia, and can infer from that, together with some of its biology, where it could spread to. So you can see that Europe is quite suitable, some parts of more the southern Africa, but here also in Brazil and Argentina, and some parts of North America as well. Only a little bit here, Toronto is maybe a risk zone, and in BC. It could also spread too. However, it has not yet reached those continents, to our knowledge. A little bit about the life cycle, because it's important to understand the life cycle if I want to tell you about how we're looking for nests using quite recent technology. So you can see here in spring, this is when the foundresses emerge, usually from the soil or from some wood hidings where they spent the winter. So those are also called queens. So they found a nest, a primary nest, which is like a little ball, as you probably know from diverse wasp species. And this here would be in May or June. And then it's the period of population growth, and about 70% of the primary nest run out of space, and they search for a more suitable place and build a secondary nest, which is most often very high in tree crowns. Secondary nests can reach quite big dimensions, and in those secondary nests, the hornet population grows even bigger and produces what is called a sexual generation. So those are not workers any longer, but it's different castes, males and females that can actually mate. On this picture here, you can see the males that are sitting outside the nest and waiting for the females to emerge to mate with them. Once the females are mated, they disperse into the environment and search for a hiding place where they then overwinter. So those are the future foundresses that overwinter, and the rest of the colony will actually die during the winter. So the nest is going to get abandoned and is not used any longer, usually being destroyed by other insects or birds or small mammals. They can still eat the last larvae. So what are the problems with this species? The first one, a most known one, is that it's an efficient predator of insects with a preference for Hymenoptera, so wasps and mainly wasps, including honeybees, wild bees, and wasps. And the second one is that it can lead to losses of honeybee colonies, so whole colonies can be wiped out by this species. It is estimated, for example, that in France, between 5 and 80% of honeybee colonies can be wiped out, depending on the density of the species and also things like climate. And in this way, because it hunts so efficiently on insects, it can have a negative influence on wild pollinators and wild plants as well, because the useful insects are being eaten by this predator. And then, of course, there's also potential risk of stinging and fear in the general public. The the sting of Asian hornet of this yellow-legged Asian hornet is not more painful than another hornet that is indigenous here, the European hornet. However, if you're allergic to any kind of insect bites, this can be a potential risk to you. So many people are just afraid. Okay, now about radio telemetry, which is going to be like the main theme of this talk. You might know about radio telemetry, which is often used in wildlife ecology. So you have a deer, for example, like on this picture here, with a transmitter, a so-called radio tag around its neck. It has a little antenna, and this emits a radio signal, which is basically just a little beep. Like it's really just a tone, like that is emitted by this antenna. And then on the other hand, you have someone with a receiver and an antenna that can receive this radio signal and translate it into this beep and can hear it. And through this very specific antenna, you can determine from which direction the radio signal is coming from. So if, let's say, the signal comes from this little forest patch over here in the picture, you could know that it's coming from there and not from other directions, to the left or to the right. And then you can just go towards it and find, in this case, for example, the deer or whatever you tagged with the transmitter. So this is the general concept of radio telemetry. We can use this technology nowadays for much smaller animals, organisms, just because of how technology has advanced. So there was an English researcher, Peter Kennedy, who with his team developed a radio telemetry technique for searching nests of the invasive Asian hornet. So as you can see in the pictures here, you have also radio tags that are much smaller and can be attached under a hornet. And because hornets are very used to carry quite heavy weight, that can be even heavier than themselves, to their colony, for example, bees, they can not easily, but they can carry this weight of a radio tag even to the nests. To further understand what we are doing, you do have to understand a little bit the situation in Switzerland. So where we are at the invasion by the yellow-legged Asian hornet. On the left, you see the map of Switzerland with circles around locations where the Asian hornet has been found. So the first one was found here in the Jura, close to where I am, in 2017. It was a single specimen and nothing else. So it probably came over the border from France here. Then in 2019, down here close to Lausanne, and a little nest was found with dead specimens. So there was the first indication that we have some kind of settlement. And then it really started in 2020 when we found lots of hornets and 2 nests in Geneva, and also one here in the Jura Mountains. And 1 specimen was also found here in the Ticino. So south of the Alps. The risk mapping that I showed you earlier based on climatic conditions, we also did that specifically for Switzerland, and you can see that the points where the hornet was found are in risk zones. However, it has really the potential to spread much more within Switzerland, even into the valleys of the Alps, and much more southern into the Ticino as well. So we can say the invasion has just started, but we expect that we will find more, and especially more nests throughout the next years. So what I'm going to take as an example today is the Jura Mountains in Switzerland. So you can see this nest that has been found this year, last year, and I'm going to tell you about the story, how we found it, and how we used radio telemetry to find the nest, and then how we proceeded there. So the first reports were in what is called the little town of Le Noirmont, and it's quite high, about 1,000 meters above sea level in the mountains, very close to the French border. And what was reported was 2 people in this town that reported the Asian hornet on feeding on fruits that were falling. They were falling in September, and then the hornets were looking for sugar, and they were feeding on those fruits. And just some days later, a beekeeper that has his beehives here, more or less in the forest, also observed the Asian hornet preying on his bees, as you can see on the lower picture here. So we went there and assessed the situation at first, and we saw very quickly that yes, there is the Asian hornet active, and we have to look for the nest to eliminate it, and so that there's not this high pressure on the bees in the environment and other insects. So what we did is, at first, we captured hornets in front of the beehive, so just with an insect net, and put it in like a little ventilated vial here. And we first tried out a method that is called triangulation. So basically, you go to a more or less open field, nicely here in the mountains with cows, and you let the hornet go. And what a hornet is doing when it was captured, it does first like a little orientation flight indicated by this red circle here, and then just for orientation, and then it will take off and usually immediately goes to its nest where it feels safe. So we can use this behavior to know in which direction the nest should be. So we captured several hornets, let them fly, and you can see the flashes indicate on the right picture here, they indicate the direction of flight of those hornets. And it's not always straightforward, because sometimes they go just to a nearby tree where they save themselves and wait a little bit before they take off to the nest. But what we found out is that it's probably somewhere here in the forest. And so we went into the forest and very quickly realized, well, to find a nest in there is like finding a needle in a haystack. So we need a better method to find this nest. And that's why I remembered the radio telemetry method, which I proposed earlier to the Swiss government, and that we also tried out already in Geneva. The canton of Geneva was so nice to send us the radio telemetry equipment, and so we could use it also in the Jura. And what it involves is you have to capture a hornet again, and then you make it sleepy by just putting it in an ice bucket for about 10 minutes. You take it out and it's barely moving just because it's so cold. And you have a little bit of time to attach a radio tag on it, as you can see in the left picture. And then you have the hornet with this tag here under its abdomen and with a long antenna that emits the radio signal. It then wakes up slowly, and you can bring it into a location where you can easily follow it, give it maybe some honey or some other sugars so that it can gain a little bit of strength, and let it go. What happens usually is that they're not necessarily going straight back to the nest because they feel that they have something attached to themselves, so they try to get rid of it, maybe fly in the next bush or the next tree and stay there for a while. The situation here was that it was already evening when we had everything done. and it got colder, and the hornet wasn't moving, so I decided to come back next day. So I also had this antenna and a receiver around my shoulders here, and followed the signal that I found. And only about like an hour and a half later, I did find the radio tag in the middle of the forest on the floor, detached, as you can see here. So very apparently, the hornet was able to get rid of it. Then I thought, oh, well, the hornet will not fly into the middle of the forest just for nothing. So it is very probable that the nest is somewhere around here. And very logically, by knowing a little bit about hornet behavior, I could guess that the nest would be very close by, because what hornets are doing is they do what is called aggressive grooming. So when a hornet's coming back, they groom this hornet in their nests, for example, to get rid of parasites or something like that. So I just looked up, and well, above me were just trees. So I had to go around a little bit and search, and eventually I found in this tree here, up in the crown, something moving that I thought being the nest. I had a little app with me. I could determine that it was at 35 meters high in an ash tree here. And it looked very much like a hornet nest, but of course we did not really know which species it is. So we did not want to get someone in to eliminate this nest and then later find out it's maybe a native species. So we called someone with a drone that in an attempt to make some pictures or videos to determine which species it is. So the guy came. It was very difficult to fly a drone in the middle of a forest, but he succeeded to take some pictures of the nest. But as you can guess from the picture on the very right, yeah, you do see a nest, and you do see that it is high in the tree crown, indicating that it is most probably the Asian hornet, but you cannot really determine the species of the hornet by this picture. So we were lucky. Someone from the town came by, and he was a wildlife photographer, and he came with his equipment and took and snatched some closer up pictures. As you can see in the middle picture, it is even with such an equipment not so clear what we're having here, but he did eventually take some pictures from which I could determine that it is indeed the Asian hornet, just by looking at the pattern of the abdomen. So by this time then we knew it was really the Asian hornet. And now what? So we have a nest that is in the middle of the forest, about 35 meters high in an ash tree. What we do? Usually what we do is we would take like a telescopic rod and inject an insecticide, or we take a bucket truck, for example, from the fire police, and approach the nest in order to treat it. But for the telescopic rod, the nest was definitely too high, so we could not get a long enough rod up there. And for the bucket truck, there was no access for the truck, so because it was really just a little hiking path beside it and nothing else. So we decided to hire some professional climbers, tree climbers, and a team came, and they put with a slingshot, as you can see in the left picture, a rope into the tree. They had some protective equipment to not get stung when approaching the nest, and then climbed up into the tree to get closer to the nest. You can see how it's slowly approaching the nest. On the bottom here was another company that is specialized in eliminating wasp and hornet nests. And they had an insecticide that was pumped with a little tube up into like a smaller telescopic rod that could then be injected into the nest, as you can see on the right picture here. I realize the pictures are not so clear, but yeah, the nest was at 35 meters in the tree crown, so it was not so easy to take good pictures. So this was successfully done, and for me as an entomologist, I of course worry if someone's using an insecticide in the middle of the forest, that other species might come along after to prey on this dead hornet nest and then also get intoxicated, or birds. So I asked the climber to go up again, and this time with a saw, and bring me down the nest. And this is also because I wanted to study this nest and see what is in there. So they actually succeeded doing that. He went up and brought down the nest in the plastic bag, and as you can see, it was relatively small. I think it was about 35 centimeters in diameter, which is not surprising because it was relatively high in the mountains. So the climate is not the best for the species to build a big colony. And then we brought this nest into the lab and dissected it to see what is in there. So I had some students that helped me there. There were some summer students there, and we measured everything, counted everything, and this was very important. We found out, for example, that the nest contained already quite a good number of males. So we knew that the sexual population was already active, and could determine from that that it is probable that there were actually some females that already mated and might have escaped into the environment before we could bring down the nest. And this information is very crucial because it just means that this year we have to be very attentive in this region to see if new nests are founded. So we can assume a relatively high risk of this happening in this region. There are also other methods of finding hornet nests. One is development from Italy, where they use a harmonic radar. So this is a relatively small radar that can be mounted onto some wheels and eject behind a car, for example. And it's relatively easy to attach a small wire, a small diode on the hornet and let it fly. And with the radar, then you can track it. And scientifically, it's a very, very beautiful method because you can really get data every couple of seconds and see the real, almost in real time, the track of the hornet where it's flying to. However, unfortunately, this technique is still quite expensive. So we're talking about 100,000 euros for this system just to acquire it, and then of course all the hours of the staff that is using it. While for radio telemetry, for example, we're maybe talking 5,000 euros, which has to be acquired once. So once then you have the equipment, you just need about 200 euros for each radio tag. So it's much cheaper. And then there's thermal imaging that is developing as well on a fast pace. However, this technique is probably great when you have a good idea where the nest might be. So you have to determine quite well where it is, because if not, it's again like looking for a needle in a haystack, and you would have to search a big area with thermal images. That is not really feasible. So we can determine that radio telemetry is a very useful method, and that is relatively inexpensive, and you really just need an hour or two of searching until finding the nest, and you can then eliminate it. Maybe some words now about Canada and the US, because here we have, as I mentioned in the very beginning, the Asian giant hornet that just that just invaded. We were doing mainly for the European Union a risk assessment about this species, so we did wanted to know, would it be able to establish as well in Europe? And as you can see from the map here, yes, it would. And it would also be able to establish in North America and also go further north there. And this has to do with its biology because it's more cold tolerant as it overwinters in holes in the soil. And on the right side, you can see and the distribution. So everything that is orange to red, not necessarily yellow, would be places where it would be predicted to establish. And if you look at the distribution that was determined in North America last year, especially last year and this, last year and the year before that, in this side, you can see it corresponds quite well with the modeling. So also in the US, in Washington, they use radio telemetry to find the first nests of the Asian giant hornet that you might have heard of. So you can see here the Asian giant hornet with the radio tag. It looks just quite slightly different, but it's basically the same thing. And so this hornet has a different biology. It nests often in the ground or in tree stumps, and in this case, the nest was found in a tree. They've wrapped the tree with the plastic wrap, and then they use the giant vacuum cleaner basically to pump them all out and get them into a tube like this, where they could kill them. And one of the main differences as well to our approach is they have much cooler suits. And as you can see, right? So, but just this to say that also in North America with the different species that is invasive, their radio telemetry has been used very successfully in tracking down the nests and eliminating it, and therefore getting a step closer to, well, in North America, maybe eliminating the species, which will be very difficult. If not that, at least slow the spread and slow the impact on bees and the environment. And with this, I have finished my presentation.
Thank you, Lukas. Does anyone have any questions for Lukas?
Yeah, hi, Lukas. These hornets, you say they've come into North America. They're all over the place now. What were they doing where they came from originally in Asia? What were they killing out there? What were they eating out there, etc.?
Okay.
How do these things get around, I suppose?
Yeah. So in Asia, where they're coming from, they are also hunting different kind of insects. And with the humans starting to having beehives and to rear bees really and put them into colonies and for honey production and so on. Of course, it made the life of the hornet much easier because then they had a place to go where it would be assured that they have an easy food. With us having beehives, we also made the hornet's life easier because we selected bees for being more friendly, less aggressive. So they were less and less able to defend themselves from predators like those hornets. However, what we know is that in Asia, for example, the Asian variety of honeybee is still much more effective in defending themselves from those hornets. So they have behavior, for example, to create a ball of bees around those hornets and by vibrating, they would increase the temperature within this ball of bees to such a high temperature that the hornet inside will be dying. Another behavior is to build like a kind of a rug of bees in front of the beehives that would wave up and down, and therefore scaring off hornets. The bees here in Europe also do this to a certain extent, but just not as much.
So you're going to have to train these European and North American bees to be more aggressive. Is that your next project?
No, I think that would be very, very hard, especially here in Switzerland, but also in other European countries. And those varieties are highly protected because you know, they were reared for such a long time and selected for such a long time, especially to produce a certain amount of honey, etc. So it would be very, very difficult to change something in there. I think you know, what we're doing right now by searching nests and destroying them, this is obviously just a desperate attempt to slow the spread and to decrease the impact on bees and the environment. So this is basically not really a long-term solution. The next step would be to find, for example, a natural enemy, something that kills naturally on those hornets. And that could be, for example, a virus or a fungus that is killing insects. The problem with those diseases, for example, is that they're often not so species specific. So, you know, we can't just bring something like this in here because we have ourselves hornets that originate from Europe, like Vespa crabro, which is the European hornet. So it is very, very difficult, and that's why it has not been successfully done yet. But for example, the French government is working on that to see what we can find in terms of a more long-term solution.
You haven't spoken of the bees as pollinators, and that I think is a very critical issue. If they are lost, we're lost.
Yeah, exactly. And so this is one of the main problems, and that's why it is often highlighted in relation to honeybees as well, because we're using honeybees to pollinate, for example, almond fields or apple orchards or whatever it is. And our honeybees, we know this, are in decline already by diverse problems of pesticides, of the varroa mite, of just landscape changes, etc. So we know that they're already stressed, and very certainly the addition of a stress like a honeybee predator, like the Asian hornet, can really have a very profound impact again on those bees. And yeah, that is right. So this is one of the very problematic things about the Asian hornet. What we do not know, or what is very difficult to quantify, is the impact on other pollinators, because they're much less known and they're not so conveniently in hives that we can study relatively well. However, looking at the impact on honeybees, we can only imagine that it also can have a profound effect on those wild pollinators and just aggravate the situation much more.
Hi, Lucas. Thank you very much. That was a very interesting talk. I didn't realize insects could be so interesting, despite Arthur being part of the club for so long. So I was going to ask a question which Alan actually touched upon. You know, can we fight them by releasing something else in the environment? So I recently read this article on genetically modified mosquitoes being released in Florida. I was wondering what your thoughts on that project was.
Yes, it's a very, very interesting project that I actually also discussed with Arthur once, I remember, one of our evenings. And yeah, it is a very promising technique, and exactly in future, I think it's going to be much more used for those kind of problems. Here in Switzerland, it is actually discussed, and there are some also government representatives that are for the advancement of those techniques. However, there's a very strong lobby also against that. And Switzerland being a very, very conservative country, where we already have difficulties to use biological control, which Canada, for example, the US have adopted a long time ago. I think at least here will take a long time until we can really use it for this technique, CRISPR, for example, to genetically modify organisms and release them into the environment. Although this is being done with plants, of course, and crops already. However, having this very strong lobby against that, I don't see this coming very quickly with insects.
Yeah, we'll take one more question, Basil, and then in the interest of time, we'll have to move on.
Lukas, do the murder hornets like things like the deer ticks that create Lyme disease?
Oh, if they could transmit something to humans, is this the question?
No. Do they like eating or killing deer ticks?
Oh, okay. To my knowledge, they do not. They're much more specialized on hunting on flowers, for example, where you have the pollinators. They do eat occasionally things like a mantis or other larger insects that are maybe not so often at flowers, but I think they developed a strategy that they're much more around food sources of pollinators in order to catch them.
Thank you.
I have Gerd to thank, Lukas, and I don't see Gerd, but I do see Petrelius Zwackerman.
That's good.
Yeah, Petrelius Zwackerman. Sorry about this. I should have maybe changed this. Well, that was most interesting. It shows how everything is connected in our ecological system that we all live in, and how such little things can have such a large impact on the bees, on pollination, and all this. And I'm sure that is just one example. I've been a couple of times in New Zealand, and there you can see where invasive species have been brought in. Before anyone came to New Zealand, for example, there was only one mammal in New Zealand, which was a bat, nothing else. And now it's completely full of them within the last few hundred years. And they did all these things. They introduced other species that would then fight the invasive species, and then they became a problem. So it's a very, very complex problem, and I'm glad we could hear it from such a expert voice from you, and even almost entertaining how you presented it with finding them and all this. So thank you very much. I'm sure that's something most of us have never really heard about. And thank you, Arthur, also that you brought this to us. So it was a great talk. So thank you very much on behalf of our whole Rotary Club.
Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
I did.
Yeah, Lukas, we are going to go carry on with our meeting, and you're very welcome to stay, but I know it may be supper time where you are. So we completely understand if you want to leave if you're busy, but you're very, very welcome to stay if you want.
Yeah, thank you. I will have to leave because I have to do some preparations for tomorrow, and it's already after 7 o'clock here in the evening. So I have to go back to my son as well.
Thank you very much, Lukas.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Okay.
Thank you.